Welcome to Interruptions podcast, where we talk to individuals who have dealt with trauma and interruptions in their personal and professional lives and their journey towards being resilient. Every episode, we will talk about actionable advice that you can apply today to restore yourself, your career, and find the courage to reinvent yourself in the midst of your interruptions. Our names are Odell Montgomery Cooper
and Cathy Patton. Hi, Odell. It's been a minute, but we are back.
We're back. It feels so great to be back.
It does. And so I'm really excited that our guest this evening is Mr. David Addams. He's the executive director of the William Caspar Graustein Memorial Fund. So welcome to David.
Thank you.
Hi, hey, David.
Hi.
David, this is actually the first time that we met, so it's a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm so glad that Odell invited you.
My pleasure as well.
Odell, so tell me how you met David.
The foundation has a community leadership program called CLP, and David and I was in the same cohort. And if I'm not mistaken, that was probably your first time moving to Connecticut and you just starting working for the company, if I'm not mistaken.
I was 6 months in to the position at that point.
Okay. So yes, that's how we met.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So David, I hear that you're the reason that we have this podcast. Tell me how that happened.
Well, I don't know if I'm the reason. I just felt that Odell's story was one that was really important to share. And I thought that the podcast format would really be a good platform to get it out to as many people as possible. So, I'd say, Odell, have you ever heard of a podcast? And he kind of looked at me. And so I said, well, check it out. I think it's a space that you might want to consider, using to tell your story.
Oh, well, thank you. We do appreciate it because we have enjoyed doing this. And as you said, it's important that we tell these type of stories. So thank you again for joining us. So David, other than what we see on the Memorial Fund website, can you tell us a little bit more about the Graustein Memorial Fund that we would not find on the website?
There's not a lot that you won't find on the website. I mean, I think that the important thing to understand is that the Memorial Fund is really the manifestation of the journey of a family that came to the United States in the late 1800s. And, as immigrants had that, sort of typical experience of really working to integrate into this country, into the culture, and, really benefited from the educational opportunities that existed at that time. And that was really the platform for the family to really be able to sort of launch themselves and solidify a future, for the next generations. And the foundation is really an outgrowth of that, commitment to provide support for other Americans to have that kind of opportunity. And, it's really been evolving along those lines. And I think the other thing that you won't necessarily see on the website is the web of relationships and experiences that have happened in the now over 25 years of the foundation's existence. The Memorial Fund started in New Haven. It had a small office in New Haven and grew, eventually moving out to the current office in Hamden. And over time, really built relationships, not just in the greater New Haven area, but throughout the state, mostly through the work in the first 20-something years around early childhood. But building relationships that have informed the continued growth and direction of the Memorial Fund.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, David, as with all of us, COVID-19 has been more than what we ever anticipated and continues to have such an impact that has devastated so many. Just when we were starting to get adjusted to what everyone now is referring to as the new norm, then the issue with George Floyd occurred, and the resurgence and the strengthening of the Black Lives Matter movement. How has your team stayed committed to your mission through all of this?
You know, I have to say that the team was really firmly grounded in the mission of equity and really kind of addressing issues of race and poverty. From the real beginning of that turn that we made 5 years ago. And we've worked hard to really be anchored in that space. Honestly, the first real interruption on that journey happened in 2016. And, many of us, and I'm sure all of us here included, were, fairly shocked at the election outcome in 2016. And we had to take a step back and think about how do we, do our work in a way that responds to that particular situation, because we were, as Odell talks about in the play, reinventing ourselves. This was not a foundation that had focused on equity in its earlier years. It was one that cared about equity, but was really sort of focused on a different set of issues. And as we, we're starting to, live out the new mission, we were focused, especially because the mission is achieving equity in education. So we were really focused on looking at what are the impacts that education has in communities of color and in low-income communities. And when the presidential election happened in 2016, we realized that the landscape had changed, and that we were going to have to figure out how to make the work that we do relevant to that as well. So when the pandemic hit, it really felt initially like it was going to be more just a change in how we worked and not as much of a change in terms of what we work on. And that changed pretty quickly when we realized the magnitude of the devastation of the COVID virus on the country, on our communities, and how much it exposed the lack of equity that existed, and how vulnerable certain communities were. And so we had to, really shift again to think about what else we needed to be doing in order to both stay true to our mission, but at the same time, stay true more so to our commitment to the communities that we had started partnering with and trying to support. And that really has been an ongoing, process. We've had to change the way in which we interact, the way in which we structure our sort of work process, the way in which we, sort of invite people to seek funding, and the way in which we make funding available. So it's been a pretty comprehensive shift in many ways. And we're still, in many ways, thinking about constantly how are we sort of in touch with and paying attention to what's happening in community in a way that allows us to be as effective and supportive a partner as we can to the communities that we've chosen to care about.
Thank you. That's we actually forgot about the 2016 election.
I know.
We'd like to, right?
I liked your comment in terms of how it really exposed the inequity in the communities. So that's really true. Very true.
And we're going to be dealing with the same feature again in November, the outcome of another election.
And I think that we are dealing with challenges on every front for change. I think part of what happened in 2016 is that most of day-to-day life continued going on, and you could sort of get lulled into this false sense of security that, well, wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, we've got a jerk in the White House, and we can't depend on the federal government in the ways in which we may have been used to depending in the past. But I think as things have evolved and as it's really mushroomed in 2020, there's just a realization that everything is up for grabs.
Mhm.
We've talked about being concerned about equity in education, and just the fundamental way in which the relationship between communities and school institutions exists has been put in jeopardy. You can't guarantee that children have any relationship to school right now. I mean, there's documentation of
Yes.
a significant number, and I won't call it dropouts because I don't think you can drop out of something that's not really truly engaging you, that has not made it possible for you to function effectively in that space. And so in the same way, that Odell talks about reinventing herself, and we've talked about trying to reinvent ourselves. The school system, government, communities are going to have to reinvent themselves as well to respond to just the realization that we weren't ready. We were not really prepared for any and everything that could happen.
David, we were going to talk about education later, but seeing you've mentioned it, so I'm going to pop that question in for you now. As you know, in some schools, they're virtual. They're working from home. They're teaching from home. And just recently, I heard, I think it was Hamden had a power outage. Not a power outage. The internet crashed. So students were not able to get on. My granddaughter is here, and sometimes they're kicked off because there's so many people on. Or there's, I think it reported the other day that about 2,000 students had not logged in to their classroom. What is the foundation? What are people reaching out for you all for help and for guidance in that area? And what level of support can they reach out to you for?
So when the pandemic first hit, one of the things that we initially started trying to address was the way in which schools and families and communities were just trying to deal with health issues more than anything else. 6 months later, and as we're trying to sort of get back to some sense of I don't even know if I can call it normalcy, but maybe functionality is the right word. We have been in conversations in terms of looking at the ways in which schools and families just need to have certain support systems in place to address these issues. Now, we are a small family foundation. We're not equipped to address the needs of all the school systems in the state that we have relationships with in terms of dealing with technology, in terms of dealing with the kinds of training and professional development that schools need to make that shift. We have been a part of a broader sort of network in philanthropy that has stepped up. At one point, the Dalio Partnership, I think, spent $10 million providing Chromebooks to students throughout the state so that they could log on. Now, it raises the question, if you have a Chromebook, what's your connectivity looking like? Do you have Wi-Fi in your home or in your building? You've probably heard the stories of kids going, I think, to Taco Bell because there was free Wi-Fi there. And similar stories. And so, I mean, the problems are of a pretty large magnitude. So one of the things that we felt like where we could make a difference is to support the people who are trying to engage in advocating on behalf of community. When we started our new mission on focus on equity in education, one of the things that was clear is that certain voices were missing from the education table, specifically the parents and the students of color who are most affected by racism and poverty in the state. And so we, initially 5 years ago, began supporting organizations who were able to organize parents as well as students to advocate on their behalf, and we continue to do that. We've increased our support for those organizations because we know that they are even more challenged right now. And we did so without making them jump through hoops. You know, we pretty much just reached out and said, look, we're sending you another check because we know that you need it, and there's nothing that you need to do, you know, to get that money.
And David, what was their response when they received a check? A surprising check where they didn't have to apply for, there weren't any grant requirements or applications, but just an organization that said, we know that you need this and we're sending this to you.
I mean, extreme gratitude, shock, surprise, and beyond. I mean, I do think that it was not expected. It was not expected. I think both from anyone to just show up and say here, and
which is rare,
right? And you know that foundations, which are typically fairly formal and bureaucratic, would not, you know, sort of make people jump through hoops. And so there was a lot of you know, both appreciation, but like, wow, like who would ever imagine, you know, that would happen.
Good.
Yeah.
So Dave, I have a question for you. Out of all of these, in terms of our new normalcy, our new functionality, as you say, tell me what has surprised you about your team and yourself in terms of working and pivoting and adjusting through all of this?
Well, I'll start with myself. You know, I think I always knew that I was a bit of an extroverted introvert. I didn't realize just how comfortable I was in the introvert space. I mean, you know, pandemics are ideal for introverts because you know, I mean, introverts love social distancing. And, you know, I never saw myself as a loner, even though I grew up an only child. I was a latchkey kid, so I was very used to it. I mean, I did spend a lot of time alone because, you know, obviously I had to go home by myself and get my homework started and, you know, what have you. But, you know, I think in many ways I believed I had grown out of that. I really worked from high school on to become much more extroverted and to be comfortable in that space. Okay. But, you know, the pandemic just kind of, you know, sent me back to the future. I'm like, yeah, you know, here's my world, you know.
That's funny.
But in terms of the team, I have to say, I've been really gratified to see both how adaptive and authentic that the team has been. We've had really direct conversations with each other. We push and pull on each other. We really try to keep it real. You know, we have reality checks on a frequent basis, and that's been very, very helpful because it allows me to inform the board about, you know, things that are happening in community and the challenges of doing this work. But it also helps me to understand how the team needs to be supported. And so as people were, you know, sort of getting Zoom fatigue and trying to juggle, you know, having everybody at home while you're working and just, you know, just all the emotional fatigue of seeing what's going on in the community and in the world, you know, we began to get feedback that, you know, people needed some time for themselves. And so we declared Summer Fridays.
Nice.
We made it very clear. We get it. We know people are already working above and beyond, and we needed people to take time and space for themselves. So, you know, it has been important for the team to be able to be upfront and to, you know, share, you know, their perspectives and opinions on what's happening and what they're seeing. And it allowed us to even create a new bucket beyond the COVID bucket that we created, you know, initially at the beginning of the pandemic, in terms of beginning to work with mutual aid groups in the state who don't have 501c3 certifications and
very good,
et cetera. And so, you know, we had to figure out how to support those entities because they were doing important work in the community, and did not go through the formalities of setting up an organization and getting in, you know, a spreadsheet with, you know, all kinds of information laid out that foundations tend to demand, you know, people send in. So we've had to shift.
So, Cathy, before I ask you your question, David, for those who are listening may not understand what you mean by mutual aid. Can you just explain that to them, please?
Sure. Thank you. Mutual aid is really people in community coming together to help one another, to help neighbors, to figure out how they can gather the resources, money, food, whatever, for those people that are doing without, that are struggling and need that help. And so instead of trying to sort of go through the bureaucracy of government and nonprofit organizations, which can take time and sort of oftentimes make it difficult to get everybody what they need, they just kind of stepped up and started pulling together food drives and clothing drives, whatever was
Very
needed
good.
to make that happen. Some are based in churches, some are just based in community centers, some are just based in housing projects. I mean, wherever the need is and wherever people are willing to come together.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sure our listeners will definitely need to hear that. So, Cathy, I'm not leaving you out of this conversation.
Oh,
because,
no, I'm enjoying listening.
I know. So earlier in our previous podcast, David, you're on for lucky number 7. So you're number 7.
My favorite number.
That's it.
This is it. So, Cathy, you've talked about raising a daughter who with autism and the importance of having a routine for her. And I remember you leaving to go to work before the COVID happened, and now you're working from home. And we didn't think it would last as long as it has. So that same question goes to you. What has surprised you about your daughter, your routine, you and your lifestyle that you didn't think, that's a surprise. This is what we have to do.
Initially, I think I always knew that I was a person that liked going to work outside of the house, right? And then all of a sudden they're saying, okay, don't come into work. And I'm saying, well, what does that mean? But you still have to work, right? And so it took me a minute. I mean, I have to say, I did not adjust to working at home well, because I didn't know how to. You're used to having your computer at work, and although I had a laptop, I had it with me, but you have your copier at work, and then you have a routine when you get into work and you log on and check your emails. And I'm like, well, I always stop for coffee. Well, now I got to make some coffee, and I got to fix breakfast. Now I got to fix breakfast. I got to open a kitchen in my kitchen, open a restaurant in my kitchen. I'm saying, okay, everything's kind of out of order. You're used to getting in your car, I was used to getting my daughter ready, and her bus was coming to get her, and then the bus is not coming to get her to take her to her program, and that we weren't hearing anything initially from the program that she's part of. And so I'm saying, okay, but she now has to have a routine too. Right. And so if you know anything about working with children with disabilities, to having a routine is really key for them to stay connected in a community, to stay connected with who they really are. And once you get that routine, for that routine to be broken in a matter of just a minute, it was difficult for her. It was difficult for my husband and myself. And so again, while her program is very good, and I know that they were probably trying to work around how do we still reach out to our participants, in the meantime, the parents have to deal with someone at home that has special needs. And and then I, have some really great friends, Odell, you, and really great friends who were sending me information if they heard about anything. And there was one show that was going to be on one of the major networks talking about parents at home dealing with children with special needs. And I made sure everything was done, because I said, I'm going to listen. I'm going to get some ideas as to what to do. And I listened, and all it was there are parents at home with children with special needs, and this is what they're going through. Okay, well, I knew that part. I was looking for solutions, right? And so there wasn't any solutions coming. And again, for it not to come for a day or two is okay, but for it not to come for a couple of weeks, then that really would set her back. And so we had to sit consciously and make sure that she stayed in her routine somehow. And so we were creating our own lessons, teaching lessons for her. We made sure that she did not forget some of her daily living skills, because that's really important too. If I was having a hard time, and I know there were a lot of adults having a hard time getting up and saying, well, what should I get dressed for? If I just put a shirt on, I'm going to be on a Zoom call and stay in my pajama pants, right? And so we had to recognize what we were doing as well. So we had to get up and mimic as if we were going to work, because she's watching what we do. So so it was a big adjustment. She's doing well now. Her program actually had started to do Zoom connection with the participants. So it was great for her to see her classmates on there. But again, for her, she continually asks the question, when are we going back? Because for her not to be, and she's very social. And so this is really difficult for her not to be able to have that level of connection with other people that she was so used to, and getting out in the community and doing things in the community. This has been really a challenge for her. So thank you for asking.
Always have to check in. These interruptions happen, and COVID is here a lot longer than we anticipated.
So, Odell, I'm going to ask you, what were your personal issues?
Well, my interruptions was interruptions. And David was the first to help support Interruptions production and gaining its sea legs. David, I wonder if you all know that once you all bless a project, then other organizations will support you. And because you were the first funder, it made it easier for Interruptions to be funded by others. So in the midst of submitting an application for a stage production, COVID-19 happened. And it shut down. So the stage disappeared immediately overnight. You're not meeting in public, and funders denied grants immediately. We're not supporting stage production, group meetings. And I panicked. And then a funder said, and we're not supporting gun violence. And we didn't know what to do. So I took a week back and I just prayed. And then I called David and we talked. And you mentioned it earlier, David, staying true to your mission, staying true to what's important. So the team talked and we decided that Interruptions is about gun violence. It's my gun violence and it is the trauma, but there wasn't any data or anything out yet that talked about COVID-19 as it relates to trauma, because it was too soon, too early. And we were not going to change the narrative. And everyone was asking, is it COVID related? Is it COVID related? And talking to David helped give me some language that it's another layer of trauma as time progressed on. So the stage production disappeared and it became an online production. And that's how that surprised me, because one, I didn't think I could ever do a stage production. Now I'm learning how to do a virtual production. And we had to go get Zoom licenses and figure out how to do rehearsals in Zoom. So I've learned a lot about myself in the last 3 to 4 months in terms of being able to go back and finding something about myself, my strengths of project management, and asking for help to just make this happen. So it was, I've learned a lot.
Well, you remember what Willie Shakespeare said, right?
No, tell me, please.
All the world's a stage.
I love that. I do.
Love that. So Dave, I have a question for you. So personally, you've heard how COVID-19 is happening with us. And in the midst of Interruption, when funders said no to the production, George Floyd happened. And now gun violence was, oh yes, please talk about it. But we stayed true to our mission. So personally, that's what's been going on with us. How has COVID hit you personally? How has it impacted your life? Give us the great picture of what your life was like before COVID-19.
Before COVID-19, I mean, we were, definitely engrossed in the work. And, by that point, my wife and I were empty nested. Our youngest was in New York City going to college. And, we were kind of getting used to, having all this space to ourselves. And I would say literally within a matter of days after the pandemic really kind of hit everybody. So we closed our office on March 12th.
Mm.
And I have to say, it was really due to Fahad Vahidi in our office really kind of like tugging at us because, you were kind of hearing about stuff in the news
Mm-hmm.
and Fahad wasn't letting it go. He's like, no, I think this is serious. I think we got to pay attention.
Okay.
And so, after he said it a few times, I was like, okay, let me listen, because this is sounding pretty serious. And, once I started paying attention, I was like, oh, this is some serious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, so we huddled and we made the decision to close the office. And that was on, I think I literally lived 10 minutes from the office. And so I was able to like walk out the door and like come home immediately. Other folks needed a little more time, because they're spread out throughout the state. But literally by the next day, the office was empty. And,
Wow.
That next day, my son came home from college. My wife, who actually does a lot of consulting in New York City, like had to, kind of pack up and start working from home.
Okay.
And then two of my godsons, one who was based in New York and one who was going to college in Pennsylvania, came to the house because the one in Pennsylvania's family is in Atlanta. It was just easier to get here. And we all kind of thought, well, this will be a few weeks, maybe, a month or two at most.
Mm-hmm.
And then a number of other friends came. So we went from having 2 people in the house to having 9 people in the house within a matter of days. Now, mind you, I've been working in this office for the last 6 months, but outside of that door,
oh no,
it was on and popping for, a couple of months. I mean, we literally had, all the young men in the basement, all the older folks, sort of in our upstairs in the bedrooms that the kids used to have.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
And we created like this little village setting. We did, dinner together and sort of activities together. It was frankly a lot of fun, because we've gotten so disconnected in many ways from everybody.
Yes.
Sort of being together had an element of some real sort of fun and joy of the village into it, and allowed us to really kind of get through this idea of people dying. One of the women staying at the house with us lost her father due to COVID. Her sister is a physician's assistant in New Jersey, and that's where her father was living. And, lo and behold, he got the virus and he passed away. So, we were dealing with a lot of emotions. I mean, it was a real roller coaster, looking at what was happening in the world on TV, and trying to understand what we should do and trying to figure out what were the new protocols. I mean, trying to figure out, can you go to the store? Can you order from the store? Do you wipe everything down? I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot to adjust to, while then everybody was trying to stay connected to their work. The young men were trying to stay connected to school.
Okay.
Most of us were trying to stay connected to work. One of the women here is actually a professional actress. Imagine now leaving New York City where most of your work is based and then trying to stay connected to that work. So, it was challenging. And yet I think we were able to support each other, through that process and figure out kind of what to do next.
So when you go from the excitement of empty nesters,
Woo, that was a
and
big
then
change.
and
Big,
talk
big
about an
change.
interruption to
Yes.
having now 9 people in your house.
Yeah.
Your son is home.
Yeah.
I got it. What do you all do? What do you and your wife do? And I know you all both laid back, energetic, love the outdoors, you hike,
Right. Right.
enjoy going to the city
Mhm.
for Broadway plays, and all that shut down.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What do you all what did you all do as people are listening to figure out? So how do you all what do you all do now to rejuvenate yourself, to stay connected as a couple,
Mm-hmm.
and even to stay sane as a individual? What do you do?
Yeah. So, two sort of things started happening. While we had a house full of people, we became each other's entertainment to a certain extent. And we had family dinner almost every night at that point.
Okay.
Okay. Honestly, we hadn't had family dinner in years. And so that, was interesting. And we never had family dinner that big,
Mhm.
except around Thanksgiving and Christmas and what have you. But, and then the family dinners began to take on a theme. I started
Hmm.
after blessing the food and everybody got their plate, I would sort of ask a question
Nice.
that would sort of engage people in thinking about, something that they hadn't thought about, or, so we got to know each other in some really
Oh,
new,
that's good.
fun and
I
interesting
like
ways. Yeah.
that.
So that was cool. And frankly, we had some intergenerational dynamics that, frankly, we probably were missing out on, because the young
Mm.
men were either, away at school or working and living in their own world. And so we got to, learn a little bit more and got to ask some questions about, trap music and stuff like that. Right.
All right, trap music. I'm sorry, I'm out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to catch up.
Yes, you will.
All right, I
You
have
will.
I have
Right,
some
right,
work
right.
to do.
But as people started migrating back home, and so now we're back to, it's the three of us, my wife and I and our youngest son, because
Okay.
he's, still going to school remotely.
Mhm.
We had to figure out how do we stay physically active, because my wife is very active in Bikram yoga and was going to the studio sometimes every day. I would go to the gym. So we had to figure out how to, sort of do that
Mhm.
differently. Interestingly enough, and this is the first time in my life I've ever lived in the suburbs, I say for the first 5 years that I lived here, I didn't really know my neighbors at all. I mean, we see them and maybe wave on the way, in and out. But these last 6 months have gotten to know the neighbors, because
Nice.
we walk our dog every day up and down the cul-de-sac. And it's interesting because you can tell we're city people because we like to walk up and down the street. Our neighbors don't do that.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to say, the thing that I miss the most about, leaving New York City is walking, being able to walk out the door and go places, go anywhere. And so I finally got to sort of get my walk on again. The gardening game at home really kicked up
Okay.
to a very, new and significant degree. And then a couple of online things began to happen. My wife's family has a weekly Zoom where each member of the family, and this is family spread out all over the country, each week some member of the family takes responsibility for some activity. And it's
Good.
been actually quite fun.
Does that still go on?
It's still going on.
Good.
Awesome.
I am a part of a Zoom weekly with the guys I grew up with on the south side of Chicago. And it reconnected, us, because we were all spread out all over the country as well. It reconnected us in a way that we had kind of lost touch. Obviously, some of us were more in touch with others, but the whole circle of guys that we used to hang out with and literally, sit on the corner and drink wine. That's what we did.
Right.
So that's been really good, reconnecting, with those brothers. And then, I got pulled into another group. It was funny. A friend of mine in New York, who works in New York, he lives in Jersey, had been trying to pull me into this Black men's book club. Right about the time that I left New York City, and the book club usually happened in Brooklyn. So I had totally missed out on that. Well, now it's online, and so I can participate in that, and that's been
very
fun.
nice. Okay.
And then we had been active members of something in New York City for the last 10 years called Harlem Movie Club, which happens 10 months out of the year, once a month, 10 months out of the year. And it happens in Harlem. 2 people pick a movie and we get together. We used to get together and potluck and talk and, have fun. That's moved online as well. So we're pretty actively engaged with our network. So yeah, it really has been positive. My wife's been able to connect with her Bikram community online. She's set up her studio in her office. So we're still connected. I managed to introduce my 86-year-old mother to, video conferencing. First got her on Facebook Messenger, and my daughter and I would have little 3-way chats with mom. And, it was just kind of cute and fun to, see her adapt to the technology. But, I've unleashed the genie. And so now she's, zooming into the co-op board meetings where she lives. And so it's been really, interesting and fun.
Good.
But, and I think it's what, has to happen. We have to support each other in figuring out how to adapt to this new reality.
Yeah,
it's true. But David, you have to tell the story. Your daughter is home. And
so she actually was here. She came back about 2 weeks ago because she needed some of that, home cooking and what have you. My daughter is expecting next spring.
Oh, awesome.
But she was having very severe nausea to the point where she was in the hospital. In fact, I drove to New York one Saturday to pick her up and take her back home because she had been in the hospital a couple of days, was losing weight, was not keeping anything down. And so just based upon her treatment needs and just emotional needs as well, she decided to, come up here. And, just with the constant care and attention that you really can't get in the hospital. I mean, I think hospitals do a fantastic job, but, sometimes you just need that round the clock, home cooking kind of thing, that she got back to the point where she could begin to, sort of get a little bit, and was not literally throwing up like every 20 minutes. And I'd say after she was here for about 4 or 5 days, she was, back to eating like a horse. And I knew she was fine when she got her favorite dish, which is camarones al diablo, spicy shrimp.
Okay.
From Mezcal, I'd say the best Mexican restaurant in the area.
All right.
So she went back home. Her husband came up to stay with us for a while because obviously he was missing his wife. And their anniversary was this past Saturday, and they wanted to spend that alone, which I totally understand.
Well, listen, congratulations. I know this is your first grandchild, and
Absolutely.
Cathy is experiencing the same. When is the child due?
Yes, Miss Ram. I call her Princess Ramsey. She is due on October 18th. And so, the change, and you talk about interruptions, even with that whole process, right? That the father can't go to the appointments, and my son just has to drop his wife off and wait in the parking lot and can't even go in to see the ultrasound. So that's been a big interruption for them. And so it has been difficult for them. I know, David, you talked a lot about the camaraderie and pulling us all together, which I think is great. And I think I am going to miss that piece when this is all over. We hope that some of this, we hope that it lingers, right? That in terms of the getting together and staying in contact with each other and the Zoom, because it has forced us to communicate in a way other than text, right?
Yes. No, you're right.
Yeah. So I think that's great. I know for me initially, one of the things I should have said is when they said, oh, stock up on things. And, I'm not my grandmother. My grandmother would have had all of this stocked up in the basement already before even anything hit. And I went to the grocery store and said, well, I have no clue. What am I stocking up on? Because first of all, I don't feel like cooking every day. And so, I was just like, stock up on what I have. I still have canned goods stuff downstairs. I said, I don't even know what to do with this because I don't use canned goods on anything. So I'm like, that was a big change for me, just trying to figure out how to stock up more than just regular grocery store shopping.
Right.
Yeah, and figuring out what was safe. So, David, I know you heard me say that my daughter is autistic. She's my youngest daughter, but although she's going to be 28 and having an adult child with autism. And so just that challenge, that interruption of her life, because it was already difficult. Right. And you talk about education equity and talk about employment inequity, employers not wanting to hire someone with disabilities. And as she loses more and more of that connection with her community and getting those basic skills and those employment skills, I fear that employers will have even more of an opportunity not to accept someone with a disability over taking someone that is at full capacity. And so what I would ask you is, I know that your Memorial Fund does a lot of outreach and accepts a lot of requests. And so have you ever had someone request funding to work with particular adults or children with disabilities? And what does that look like? What do you look for when someone's coming to your fund to say, listen, we'd like to start this, and but what is it that you are really key in looking for?
Right. We have not had that specific request. We tend to sort of fund more systems change kind of work. I think the thing that we would want to see is how is it that we can help the system begin to adapt to meeting the needs of a population that has been so marginalized for so long. And I don't use the term disabled. When I was in New York City, I ran a youth program to provide academic opportunities for Black and Latino youth in New York City, and we had autistic young people in the program, and they, from my perspective, weren't disabled. They were differently able. They had lots of strengths and assets, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
There was a young man in my program who ended up being the best tutor that we had, because we basically would take our students who had either they were older or graduated and have them come back as counselors and tutors in our summer program. And one of the things that I noticed about him that was different from the other young people was that most young people, if you tell them, okay, well, help this young person learn this or to do their homework, most young people will then say to the kid, okay, here's what you do. And he did something very different. He talked them through the process of them doing it themselves, and the kids actually learned more.
Wow.
From that process. And I don't know enough about the science to know how his different ability made that possible. But he was so good at it, I made him the head tutor so that he could try to teach the other tutors how to do it that way. Because as opposed to just sort of doing it for the kid, it's like, say, here, this is what you do. And some kids do learn by watching, but they don't necessarily develop that skill themselves. And I really was, very appreciative of the fact that he was able to help those young people learn for themselves as opposed to just being told how to do it. So, I think there's a way in which the system does need to recognize those different abilities and to support that. And, frankly, employers need to learn that because, as they, become adults, they have skills and aptitudes that other people don't have.
That's right.
And studies have shown that the more diverse your workforce, frankly, the stronger it is, the better the outcomes, the higher the productivity, the higher the profit, if that's what's important to you. But most employers are not willing to learn how to manage diverse groups, whatever the source of the diversity is. And, it does challenge you, because you do have to constantly understand everybody's difference. But frankly, we live in a world of difference. And if we're not going to learn about the differences, then we're not really learning how to function in this world.
I agree.
We're trying to fit people in the square, holes when they're round pegs, and that just doesn't work. I mean, that's a huge part of the problem that we have in our world today, trying to force everybody to conform to some artificial, norm.
Okay. David, I have to ask a question. So we have no idea how long we're going to be in this virtual reality. Our students working from home, companies needing to reinvent themselves, individuals reinventing themselves. Can you just project, other than Dallas Cowboys going to the Super Bowl next year?
I'm sorry, I didn't see that anywhere. Was that on the news today? I didn't see
Other
that.
than Dallas Cowboys going to the Super Bowl next year.
And losing to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, I saw that. Yes, I saw that. David, I mean, companies, our listeners are listening and they're going to go to your website and to figure out what's out there. What do you want people, what should companies and individuals should start thinking about for their communities? What's on the horizon? I'm always seeing that David Addams been invited to speak at this large group, this men's function. They're everywhere. So people want to hear from you. So what should people be thinking about to stay relevant and to stay committed to their mission?
So we are living through the biggest wake-up call that I think any of us have lived through. And I include people who have been through all kinds of changes over the decades. And I want people to understand that when you get that kind of wake-up call, it's really not so much a time to go back to what you knew. It's a time to understand what needs to change.
Okay.
To understand that we're in this situation because things weren't working, even though they appear to be working at some level. And this is now an opportunity to reinvent everything, quite frankly. And to really think through, well, how do we want this to work going forward? What should we have been doing, and how can we start doing that? How can we reinvent school? The technology obviously exists. I mean, that's the really interesting thing. We now know. I mean, someone kind of said, oh, so we could have given kids free iPads all along and Chromebooks all along. Well, why didn't we? We could have, sort of provided our access to, to the internet to everyone. Well, why didn't we? What was that all about? And so there are lots of ways in which we now understand that there are things that need to change, that can change, and that each one of us is responsibility, for making that change. It's interesting because someone foretold this time. I don't know if you've heard of Octavia Butler.
Yes, you and I were talking about that.
Right, and she wrote this book called two books, The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. And if you read that book is what we're living through right now. And not just the pandemic. I'm talking about these last few years. And part of what the book was about was how people were beginning to adapt and change and really accept and understand how important it is to be prepared to change, to welcome change. We tend to try to avoid change. We tend to want things to stay the way they are. Yes. Status quo was not working for everybody. And frankly, it wasn't really working for most people. And I think that, the fact that people have really become so dysfunctional in so many ways during this period is a sign of that. I mean, I think that the increase in gun violence around the country is a sign of that. My hometown has been as bad as it already was. It's been even worse in some ways. And, obviously the police violence is not new, but we know more about it, and we also know just how entrenched the system is in defending the police over and above everything. People talk about Blue Lives Matter, and that's never been a question. If something happens to police, the system rallies immediately to address that.
Absolutely.
The problem is not, what happens to police. The problem is what happens to the average Joe or Jane in poor communities, and especially Black and brown Joe and Janes. because the system does not rally to support us. That has to change.
Okay.
And we've gotten to a point where everybody is now committed to making that change. And I think it's a wonderful thing.
That's good. So, David, we have two questions for you. I have two questions for you. One's a real easy one. What does the R stand for in your name?
So my first name is Robert. For whatever reason, my mother's never called me Robert unless she was calling all three names, which meant I was in trouble.
That's
okay.
That's right.
All right. I had to ask. I said, he's going to come. I'm going to ask that question.
Yes.
So in our last couple of minutes before we wrap up, what are you, because people see the organization, they know what the foundation does and the impact that it has on our community. And you can always Google someone to see their profile and their activity. But tell us, David, what are you in your heart? What are you passionate about?
I'm passionate about family. And, to a great extent, because I grew up really literally having one family member that I could really connect with on a regular basis. I was raised by a single mom who, was my everything and who's still a part of my everything. And I think that I've, been able to extend, obviously, that commitment to family to, my wife and kids and really, married someone who's very passionate about family as well. And it's, something that we share. And, I'm blessed to have in-laws that I really dearly care for and who are wonderful, supportive in-laws as well. But also having built a larger extended family that we call our village, the people who knew that they could just sort of, show up when it hit the fan, that they could just move in because, they needed that and we needed to support that. And we, a lot of that village co-parented our children together, still, have that kind of connection because, you never really stop parenting your children anyway.
Yes.
Even though these are frankly all young men, we're there to support them. And so, the idea of family, not just your biological birth family, but, who's really there for you, and was able to, take the intense passion and love that my mother poured into me and be able to share that in, as broad a space of love, to family and village as I've been able to.
Oh, I remember when my son died and you would check in on me and I was just in a very dark space. Your wife said, listen, Odell, if you just need to come, there's a hole downstairs. No one will bother you.
Mm-hmm.
You can cry as much as you need to, be in the space that you need to be in, and opened up your house and said, listen, if you downstairs is all yours if you need it. And I remember coming by and just hanging out in your beautiful garden in the hammock.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I stayed and nobody could see me crying. So being able to have the heart to open up to families, extended families and communities, and to have that space is truly welcome.
Yeah, well, my wife has taught me to count blessings and to understand that when you're blessed, you have to share those blessings. Mm-hmm. And so, every time that we've been blessed to have more, we've always tried to figure out how to make sure that that was available to others, that we use what we were blessed with to support others and share that with others.
Okay. So, David, our last question, any lasting comment you want to give to young entrepreneurs, college graduates who are looking to start working with companies and compromising their mission, their goals to stay relevant, to get a job, to leave the state? Sometimes we make decisions out of being desperate and lack of options. What is it that you would like to say to companies to stay committed to their mission during this midst of a huge interruption?
So I'll borrow a message from August Wilson. You have to sort of understand that life is always about two trains running, and as much as you have hopes and dreams and goals and visions, you also have to adapt. And it doesn't mean you have to give up your dreams. It means that you sometimes have to take a detour and really, be clear that you're making a detour for that kind of short-term purpose. But at the same time, if that was truly your heart's desire, if that was your goal and your dream, then you're going to find a way to make that happen. And you need to do that. And you need to, share that vision. You need to let people know, what it is you want to do, what support you need. It's very hard for people to support you if they don't know what it is that you're trying to do and what you need to make that happen. So that's, I think, the important thing that we need to share. Frankly, one of the bigger challenges that, we faced at the Memorial Fund is understanding all of what, community wants and needs and how they need that to happen. We have turned to trying to deploy not just our grant funds, which is really only about 5% of the funds that we hold, but the other 95% of our portfolio, we're trying to figure out how to invest that, to the benefit of communities in Connecticut. And it's actually been a lot harder work than trying to give out grant money. Part of the problem is that, entrepreneurs and community development people, housing development people are not reaching out to every corner where they can get support. And so, we and many others stand ready to provide that support if we just knew, when, where, and how to give it.
Why, thank you. And
That's
I'm
beautiful.
sure.
Thank you.
And I'm really hoping that they listen to this message and contact you.
Absolutely. Please do. Please do.
All right. Kathy, any other questions you have for David?
No, David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I
Real
really
pleasure
appreciate you joining us. And I know your words are going to really be impactful for others that are listening. So thank you so much for taking this time out.
My pleasure.
Yes. So this concludes podcast 7 and Interruptions. I know it's a wonderful thing. Kathy and I, we thank you all for joining us. I'm sure this is going to air on Saturday mornings. So please go to our website and click on the subscribe so you will get updates about all future podcasts and other information. And if you have not seen the production Interruptions, it is still on the podcast. So please look at it, click on it, watch it, share it. It's up for the month of September. So we say thank you, and we will see you in 2 weeks with our other guest. And I'm not going to say who, because Interruptions happens all the time, but it is coming. So thank you again for listening, and have a great day.
Bye.